All right, I hope I didn't miss too much important stuff. All right, so I'll try to make sure I post whatever I thought might have been crucial there. So good stuff. There's stirrings, and more people are getting excited about the prospect of, you know what, we need to be in charge of our own thing. Where did they get those notions from? From England itself. Okay, and so, but what happens when, as the colonists, as people came to America and they've been living for decades, some of them, of course, many of them have been born in America, and so that their own ideas are germinating on how government ought to operate, on the place of the people in the whole scheme of things. There are people who grow up in communist countries. True or false? There are communist countries today. True, absolutely. Well, they have, people who grow up in that have their own unique perspective on the rights of people, the place of government. Does that make sense? I mean, that's what they grew up with, that's what they knew. Well, what is happening in the latter half of the 18th century is that people are beginning to think, you know what, it should be about us. We should have the right to control our own destiny, to order our own lives in our own world. And so that's where these gosh, it just seemed like a barrage. And I always wonder about kings and leaders who apparently don't ever take a deep breath and take a step back. That's one of my favorite things to say. Take a deep breath, take a step back, and say, wow, what am I doing? I mean, the taxes just kept coming. You know what? I wonder if there had been half as many taxes, half as much oppression, if the revolutionary thoughts would have gained as much ground as they did. But then, back to where we started this whole thing, the Boston Massacre became a rallying point. Do people still do that today? Exaggerate things for their own purpose and goal?
Yes.
Absolutely. That's why you better get your information from multiple sources. I mean, and that means from the right and left politically, you just better not rely on one source. It's interesting, there's a psychological, it's called confirmation bias. We look for things that will confirm what we already believe, rather than being open to other viewpoints, other perspectives, etc. The deaths that have happened at the hands of law enforcement officers are awful. Okay? They just are. They really are. However, many of them have a context that doesn't get told. That makes sense? There's never an excuse for that. And law enforcement and anybody else needs to be held accountable for the same laws, the same rules, the same regulations, etc. But don't forget the context. That makes sense? Get the whole story. Get the whole picture. I've had some of my friends who are Black Americans who have literally been profiled, have been harassed, but you know what all of them have done? Their story to me personally, they followed the officer's instructions. And guess what? They're still alive. In some cases of tragedy, loss of life is always tragic for me. Anybody, any age, any stage, I think life is sacred. That's just my personal viewpoint. And so it's all tragic, but sometimes it has a wider context that you may or may not get from a particular news outlet, a particular website, a particular whatever. So become a person who cares more about getting all of the facts than trying to be first to express your opinion. That make sense? That's been happening for decades in the news media in America. Everybody wants to be first, and they care less about getting all the facts than they do being first to break a story. Well, I think that's foolish, and that's disingenuous. My other, true or false, in 2020, there have been peaceful protests against injustice. True. True or false? There have been riots and looters who have destroyed other people's property in the name of social justice. True. You understand? I mean, both of those are true. So as a historian, you've got to learn to say, wow, this is rarely an either or proposition. That makes it, both of them are true. So if you're going to be fair, you ought to try to tell the whole story. The other thing is, just like with the Boston Tea Party, the agenda was, we think there was a growing consensus in the colonies, we should govern ourselves. That's what's underlying all what's going on. That's what's underlying the exaggeration about the Boston Massacre. That's what's underlying the Boston Tea Party when they did what? What happened at the Boston Tea Party? That's right. They destroyed someone else's property. They threw all the tea that was on the ship into the harbor. Okay, but the agenda is we shouldn't be taxed without being represented. We should be in charge of our own affairs. So, all right. Back to our assignment. I'm going to give you the rest of the class period to complete the assignment. Am I on the screen? No? I'm not? Classic. All right. I think, here's my quick talk about 9/11, since this is the day. It's funny. Ms. Holzer in the office, her post, I think it was on Facebook, she said she was a high school senior during 9/11. And they watched it on TV, they discussed it, reacted to it, etc. My quick thing is, and there's a lot to know, there's a lot of great stories. I actually have met, visited with, we don't stay in close contact anymore, but a man who grew up in India who worked in Tower 2. He was late to work that day. And so he's alive. In fact, it was a really life-changing day for him. He was in the finance industry, and he's part of his change was to decide, wow, what really matters here? Is it really the pursuit of material things or not? And so it really changed him and his wife's life. So just because they happened to be late that day, they weren't one of the almost 3,000. What changed? My quick reading of that is, number one, the war on terror began. You begin to hear about terrorism and terrorists, and that becomes just a part of our vernacular. Number two, air travel was transformed. It was a totally different world. I remember it was about, 3 months after 9/11, no, 2.5 months. And I remember the first time I'd ever been frisked at an airport. Now, I almost talked too much, not tend to whatever, but it was like, my joke was, what profile am I fitting? Old fat white guy, but anyway. But I really was. I was frisked and got pulled aside, and air travel changed. Now things you take for granted, getting there early enough, going through screening and security, that used to not be true, but it is now in the wake of that. Number three, there was an anti-Muslim sentiment took root in America. Why? Why would that have happened in America? An anti-Muslim sentiment and occasional violence.
I thought they were terrorists.
Okay, because of the link to terrorism. Terrorists are the radical version of Islam. Now that's another part of the story. Now, are all Muslims, followers of Islam, terrorists? Of course not. But are terrorists the radicalized part of Islam? Yes. That's like telling the whole story. So don't go to the extreme and try to play like all Muslims. Everyone who's a follower of Muhammad and Islam is a kind, passive, peaceful person. That's not true. The same can be said of Christianity or any other thing. There are some jerks who claim to be Christian. Awful, terrible, awful people that have no business calling themselves a Christian. Okay, that's true of that too. So I'm just saying, tell the whole story. But yeah, it is true that, yeah, they are radical Islamists who are terrorists. But of course, that grew in the wake of that. Number 4, surveillance increased. The Patriot Act made it really, really possible for the government to get all up in your business. I watched every episode of Person of Interest. Anybody ever seen that? It's probably a whole lot truer than anybody knows. But the story is, I love the one line about that, because one of the lead character was this incredibly smart guy, and he says, oh wow, he said, who would have thought that people would give up all of their personal information if you just gave them a platform? Like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, they just tell you everything about them, tell you where they are, tell you what they're doing, tell you what they had for breakfast. I mean, tell you all of their tendencies. And anyway, so number 5, America became safer. There's only been literally a few dozen people, very few dozen, half of them were in Florida, killed by terrorists since 9/11. But we're a different country. All right, right. I about took up, well, you know what? Finish that. Get it to me by midnight Sunday night. Okay? Your assignment. Probably extra credit. So you just type up what you've written or whatever, finish writing, and I'll be quiet the rest of the minute. So, you got that? 4 paragraphs, 3 to 5 sentences on your thoughts, understanding, beliefs about the importance of 9/11. And you can certainly include some of my thoughts that I spouted out. Yes, sir?
So do we like send it to you through email?
Yeah, email it to me, please. Yes. Who's doing chapter 5 on Monday? All right.